Chapter 7. The Final Countdown. Since we're both good as dead, might as well get to know each other a little better.
Good as dead, huh? Speak for yourself, Grandpa. I plan on getting the heck out of here.
The wounded sergeant mercenary shared a brief moment of levity among the sprawled-out body parts, broken beakers, and collapsing building. The silence was broken by a blood-curdling scream. Maddox pivoted her head and scoped out a potential Alamo for the two to get situated. She found the perfect spot, a small office at the end of the long corridor. The office was at the end of an L-shaped corridor. One road led to the stairwell, the other led directly to the door of the office. She kicked in the door and hurled Mike Allen into the room.
Let's rest up for a moment. We can hold up in here until we figure out a solid game plan.
A plan? Ha!
Mike Allen said while coughing up some blood. He smiled for a second and wiped off the blood from his chin. The blood was smeared across his muzzle like a teenage girl putting on lipstick for the first time. I don't know about you, Allen. I still like our odds. I give us 20-1. At best, I give us 15-1. I'll take that bet any day and twice on Sunday.
Allen snickered at her robust response. Why do you do it, Maddox?
Do what? Be a merc?
Yeah.
The money, you big dummy. Why else would anyone do it?
Ah, how noble, he said sarcastically, while writhing in pain.
Look, the way I see it, we both live for our freedoms. We both fight for our freedoms. We both love our freedoms. We both will probably die for our freedoms. Why not get rich in the process?
Fair enough. The sergeant took a moment to regroup and regain his composure. He had been shot before, but it wasn't most enjoyable experience. But he knew how to control the decline. He slowed his breathing and checked his wounds. His brief assessment was positive. The quick clot had stopped the bleeding, and the lacerations weren't as deep as he initially thought. I heard stories about Al Mad Dog Maddox.
Yeah? Any of them good?
No, not really.
Then they're probably all accurate, she replied and chuckled.
You weren't exactly what I was picturing, Al.
It's short for Alexandra.
Ah, that makes sense.
If it's any consolation, you weren't exactly what I was expecting either.
Really?
Yeah, you recon guys sure do bitch a lot when you take a bullet. It's a through and through. Get over it. Stop being such a girly man, she said with a wince of heartfelt words. If humor was the best medicine, she dashed a pinch of it on every sentence. It worked wonders on the sergeant's attitude. His spirits had a renewed vigor. Was it enough to fight his way out of the facility? Time would tell. Alexandra is a strong name. I'm a strong woman.
Undoubtedly so.
Do you know the etymology of your name? The mercenary looked over at Mike Allen with confused gaze. She answered the sergeant by shrugging her shoulders in a perplexed manner. All I know is that it's Italian.
Alexandra means the protector of men.
How fitting.
Indeed.
Clack, clack, clack! A burst of gunfire rang out down the hallway. The two simultaneously drew what little strength was left and aimed their firearms at the closed door. Their bodies ached in pain. Neither one of the combatants was able to steady their weapon. The sergeant's hand trembled with every passing second. The sidearm weighed heavily on the sergeant's hand. He grabbed onto the bottom of the receiver in hopes to recover his stability. The mercenary hardly noticed Sergeant Allen fumbling around with his weapon. She was trained on the door like a Doberman pinscher looking at a full dinner bowl. Take a breath, Sergeant. I think we're fine for now. Sergeant Allen clasped onto Lyndall's pocket Bible. It was the one memento he reclaimed from his fallen team members. The pages were almost illegible due to the bloodstains. He flipped through the pages for something to read and stumbled onto one of the bookmarked pages. It read, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Maddox walked over to the Sergeant Allen and grabbed the Bible from his hand. She slammed the passage closed in a fit of rage. God gave up on us the second we stepped onto this island. If you want to have faith in me, like I have faith in you. We are all we got right now. It's you and me against the world. That's the only way we survive, by working together as a team. Maddox said while tucking away the Bible into her back pocket. Maddox knelt down and tucked her .45 caliber handgun into her waistband. She bowed her head and dumped the remnants of her canteen over the back of her head. The water flowed over her head, washing away the dried bloodstains. The watered-down blood pooled below her feet and created a faint pinkish circle around her body. She pulled her hair back as tight as the skin over her drum. Her hands had a firm, strange hold over her outstretched hair. She wrung out her hair like a soaked dish sponge, ready to get squeezed. She methodically put her ball cap back on and adjusted it to her liking. The mercenary turned her head over to Mike Allen while she was stuffing her ponytail into the back of her ball cap. "What'd you say, Sarge?" "Time for an ammo check," she said. The sergeant obliged with a smile. He appreciated the fact she was focused on the mission, even if she was forced into it. He grabbed his M4 and used the buttstock to push himself off the ground. Maddox flung a chair over to the Sergeant Allen's position. He instinctively grabbed the chair with his free hand. The sergeant plopped down into the chair and began to examine the M4. It was covered in soot and blood. "Okay, let's see what we got," the sergeant said. He grabbed onto the M4 and started maneuvering his hand down to the magazine release button. He took his thumb, and with a little strength he could click down on the button. The standard pressure required to detach the magazine from an M4 assault rifle was approximately 1 pound of pressure. But for the sergeant, even this was a daunting task. The button produced a loud click sound that reverberated across the room. The magazine dropped out of the receiver, and the sergeant managed to catch it right before it hit the floor. He held it in his hand, but to his chagrin, the magazine was empty. He looked back at the M4's charging handle. Not ready for the inevitable outcome, he yanked back on the charging handle, and a single round of 5.56 millimeter popped out of the ejection port. "Well, there you go. Not a total loss," the sergeant said as he recovered the round and stuck it back into the empty magazine. Maddox looked on with a little less zeal than before. Her spirits were somewhat dampened with the dire position the two now faced. She opened the cylinder of the revolver by pounding down on the cylinder release button. The 6-round cylinder flung open from the revolver. The mercenary made sure to take a soothing breath to calm her nerves. She lifted the revolver and pointed it into the air. The shell casings slowly dropped to the ground. Cling, 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 cling. The two looked down at the ground, like kids sprawling out pillowcases full of candy the day after Halloween. To the surprise of the mercenary, there were 2 unspent rounds. She quickly grabbed the rounds and intently inspected them. "Well, we're not totally hosed," the sergeant said. "Hold up there, Skippy," she responded while further examining the .45 caliber rounds. She slowly turned the rounds around to examine the head of the cartridge. The integrity of the rounds seemed to be fine at first glance, at least one of the first rounds she inspected. She juggled the rounds and swapped them in her hands. "Just our luck," she said. Mike Allen looked over at her and asked, "Huh?" The firing pin slammed down on this round, but it didn't fire. "We got one possible dud and one good round." "Perfect," she said sarcastically. "One for each of us. How about that?" "Yeah, or one for each of them," she replied in an encouraging tone. "Time for some get back." "Yeah, I like the sound of that," the sergeant said in an attempt to muster some energy. The sergeant pulled an MRE from his backpack and started tearing it open with a disjointed zeal. "You're kidding me, right?" "What? You don't like freeze-dried food?" "First of all, I don't consider an MRE food. Ooh, heck no. Hold on." The mercenary started rummaging around the office. She was looking for some hidden desk drawer snacks. The mercenary was keen to human behavior. She figured the food on the island was probably sparing, and a prudent, rational scientist would hoard snacks. "Ah, here we go," she said while grabbing onto something in an open drawer. To Mike's surprise, she pulled out some energy bars. She held them up like playing cards. As far as Mike could tell, they were manna from heaven. She flung one of the bars over to him and opened the other by ripping it open with her mouth. Mike and Maddox scarfed down the energy bars like two vacuums sucking up dust from the old carpet. Kaboom! Chow time was interrupted by a sudden impact. What could only be described as a short, loud explosion. The pair immediately made eye contact and attempted to assess the situation. What was that? It sounded like it came from the reactor room. Based on the location of the explosion, that only left one option on the table. The fail-safe had activated, the building began to collapse on itself. Mike and Maddox were now operating on a severely truncated timetable. The odds of making it topside were increasingly becoming a distant memory. It's time to dance through the pain, she said. I don't know how to dance, but I know a lot about pain. I'll take point. You cover my 6. We only have to clear 2 floors, and we can make a break to the helipad. We jump off the fucking rooftop if we have to. Either way, we're going to get the hell off this facility. It's about time we get the hell off of Plum Island. The mercenary sprung to her feet and gently nudged open the door to the office. The door made a creaking sound and carried down the corridor of the hallway. Mike rose to his feet and put his hands on Maddox's left shoulder. You take the lead. I'll cover your 6. The first sergeant reluctantly recommended to Maddox. Maddox wasn't naive of her situation. She would have to step up and carry the sergeant to the finish line. Maddox lacked any resemblance of contingency plan, so Mike was her ticket off the island. She pulled the Stefano's knife from her boot and held it in her left hand. In her right hand, she held the revolver. She dove into the hallway and started making her way to the stairwell. Mike followed the mercenary as close as he could. As she progressed down the hallway, she quickened her pace. Unknowingly to the mercenary, she began to create significant distance between the two. The sergeant's night vision goggles were compromised in the commotion. They fizzled and flickered as he fidgeted with the settings. Maddox maneuvered her way to the end of the hallway and stood ready at the entrance to the stairwell. The door to the stairwell was severely compromised, but with a little elbow grease, she could probably get it open. You know I can't let you get out of here alive. Maddox stumbled back from the door and pointed her revolver at it. The mercenary was barely able to control her sidearm. It was shaking like the flicker of a candle dancing in the wind. The heavy steel frame of the Colt 45 weighed heavily on the mercenary's hand like the first time a kid picks up a bowling ball. Dirk! The fact that you made it this far is astonishing, really. Dirk snickered from the inside of the stairwell. The only thing that separated the former teammates was a 2-inch steel door. Maddox was practically foaming at the mouth to get some payback. Dirk, I brought you into this world, and I sure as hell can take you out of it. Like I said, Maddox, I can't let you get out of here. Why don't you open this door and find out? Fine by me. The mercenary kicked on the emergency exit release for the door, and it flung open towards Maddox. She instinctively hopped out of the way, diving into cover. Dirk stepped into the hallway like a conquering king returning to his castle. Dirk stood in the doorway of the stairwell with nothing more than a bayonet in his hand. His body was nearly camouflaged in bile-laden blood. What a fucking day, huh? Click. Maddox stood up tall and pulled back the hammer on her revolver. She pointed it at her former co-worker with bad intentions. Dirk looked at her skeptically. What are you going to do with that? What I should have done a long time ago, she said while placing her hand firmly on the trigger of the revolver. Dirk dropped the bayonet and held his hands up in the air. Clap! Dirk dropped to his knees with a gaping bullet hole protruding from his chest cavity. His knees hitting the floor made a loud thud. Smoke protruded from the barrel of her gun and wafted upwards towards the ceiling like a couple sitting in a bedpost lovemaking holding dimly lit cigarettes. Damn, that fucking hurt, Dirk said as he looked up at Maddox. What the? Dirk robotically lifted himself up from the ground and dusted his uniform off. He poked the wound with his hand, and a blackish blood oozed out of the wound onto his index finger. That's new, he said, surprised to be alive. Dirk rushed his former colleague like a heavyweight boxer blitzing an opponent. She pulled the trigger a second time. Clack! Maddox was overjoyed the bullet turned out not to be a dud. The second bullet ricocheted off Dirk's forehead. His head was snapped back by the bullet. He slowly turned his head back towards Maddox. Unfortunately for Maddox, it was just a grazing shot. Black blood discharged from Dirk's forehead and covered the better half of his face. Dirk continued his assault and attempted to close the distance on Maddox. She flung her combat knife wildly as she backed away from her former colleague. Her attempts were noble, yet ultimately ineffective. Every blow that she landed on the mercenary only enraged him further. Maddox was able to land a piercing blow and plunge the knife into Dirk's chest. He slumped his head over, but only for a brief moment. He grabbed onto her wrist and slammed his hand down onto it, shattering the bones in her arm. Maddox reeled out in pain as she dangled down on the ground with a broken wrist. He flung the mercenary into the nearest steel wall, like a tantrum-prone toddler tossing a rag doll around the playground. Dirk stood in the hallway and examined the knife in his chest. He grabbed onto it with just both hands and began to slowly pull it out of his chest. Just as the knife began to recede from his chest, he paused for a moment to look down at his former boss. She looked up at him with a smile. She rolled over and hopped off the ground. Maddox unlatched her utility belt and wrapped it around her arm like a boa constrictor, wrapping around a gazelle. I'm glad you could still smile. Not many people enjoy the feeling of their own death, he said with a big-ass knife sticking out of his chest. I give as good as I get, she replied. Dirk noticeably slowed down, and with the knife protruding out of his chest, Maddox hit him directly in the heart, and the effects were compounding on Dirk. She was doing the mental gymnastics in her head. She stepped to her right, and Dirk stepped to his left. The two mercenaries began to encircle each other like a couple of novice dancers trying to learn the waltz for the first time. Maddox was in a vendetta kind of mood and decided to go for the nuclear option. She somersaulted forward at the mercenary and jumped up into the air, throwing a Superman punch. As she sprang into the air with her hand cocked back to strike down at the knife, Dirk outstretched his arm and grabbed her by the neck. She dangled in the air like a fish out of water. Dirk watched the life precipitously drain from her body. She languished in pain. Blood seeped from her eye sockets as she hung from his death grip. Dirk started up his lambasting dialogue once more. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Just as he was about to give his evil bad guy speech, a sound interrupted him from behind. It was the all-too-familiar sound of a charging handle pulled back on an M4 assault rifle. Dirk turned his head to the direction of the sound, only to be met with America's best, a uranium-tipped 5.56 45mm NATO round shot from point-blank range. The round traveled at 2,970 feet per second, all courtesy of First Sergeant Mike Allen. The round blew out the back of Dirk's skull, spewing brain matter and chunks of bone across the room. It splattered the wall of the hallway like an early impressionist painting that might be hung up in some hoity-toity art gallery. Mike dropped the M4 onto the floor and caught the falling mercenary as she broke free of Dirk's clutches.